Welcome to another PureRead audiobook. It's wonderful to have you with us. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple and easy way ensures we can continue adding more delightful audiobooks for your listening enjoyment. The following story is copyrighted PureRead Limited, the home of books you can trust. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Song of Life, an Amish romance by Grace Given. Chapter 1. Barn Raising. The day arrived for the Byler barn raising. After the devastating explosion that caused the old structure to collapse into smoldering ashes, the Amish community united and came to rebuild. The women brought in delectable foods to feed the large crowd of workers, and Rebecca greeted each warmly. Jacob joined the men, and the hammering began. 2 weeks had passed since the explosive was set, and though there were suspicions of who may have done the damage, Jacob and Rebecca decided to let it go. They, instead, prayed for the one who appeared to hold something sinister against them. "We have a gut day," said Nancy Schrock to her best friend. "Jay, we do, and Jacob and I are very grateful for everyone's help," said Rebecca. They took a second to watch the beginnings of the barn take shape. Then they joined the other women and began preparing food for the tables. At noontime, the men would stop work and eat a hearty meal before returning to their task. Rebecca listened to her mother, Claire Stoltzfus, as she talked about her garden plantings to the other women. All chimed in, giving tips on what worked best in the early spring and seeds that should be planted later when fall arrived again. The younger women listened and learned. Rebecca thought about her own daughter, Hannah. When she was old enough, she would learn the ways of Amish women as she had from her own mother and community. She smiled when she glanced out the window to see 6-year-old Samuel scramble to hand nails and small tools when someone asked for them. Jacob felt relief to free his thoughts from the recent disaster and to concentrate on his neighbors as they set beams in place. He knew he should not think about who had so much against him or his family to cause him to lose the barn, and the few animals that succumbed to the flames that horrible night. He had forgiven the perpetrator, or at the very least he thought he had. But no matter how much he spoke the words to his gut, he realized his heart remained cold and unforgiving. Richard Blanton was on a ladder, and Jacob watched as the former Englisher balanced the pole with the man on the opposite end. Jacob had noticed him pray as fervently as the others before the work began. Richard spoke to Bishop Daniel Stoltzfus, and Jacob watched his father-in-law respond with a warm smile and handshake. Later that night, after the sounds of the hammering and shouts of the men subsided into the night, Jacob pulled his Bible from the shelf. Rebecca settled in her chair with Hannah on her lap, and Samuel sat on a footstool at his father's feet. Jacob decided to choose a verse about forgiveness. Rebecca looked at him with questioning eyes and wondered why he chose the same verse for the third time in 2 weeks. She bowed her head and listened to his smooth, deep voice as he read the words. Jacob then prayed over the text. He closed the Bible and asked Samuel if he knew what forgiveness meant. "It means no matter how much someone hurts us, we will still be friends," said Samuel. The words of the child hit Jacob hard. His son was right. No matter what has happened at the hands of another, the only answer was to forgive and to move forward in friendship. He thought of his Amish community. His 4 lost cows and calf had been replaced with 4 more and 2 calves. Hay bales were covered and waiting in the adjacent pasture to be put into the hayloft. Remaining bales would be stored at one end of the barn. His gut was good to give him such blessings. "We must say good night," said Jacob. He lifted his daughter from Rebekah's arms and led the way to Hannah's bed. "You are growing, Daksha. I will soon have to build a bed for you like your brooders." Hannah did not hear him. Her eyes were closed tight, and Jacob nestled her under the soft coverlet. "I am ready, Dad," said Samuel. Jacob took his hand, and they went into Samuel's small room. Rebekah leaned over her son and kissed him good night. Jacob snuffed out the lantern. When they settled in the sitting room for their time together, Jacob said, "I hope Hannah can remain a Bobley a while longer. I am not ready to build a bigger bed for her yet." Rebekah knew Jacob's love for his children overflowed his heart. Now was the time to give her husband her good news. "You may have to build that bed sooner than you want," she said. "We have another little one on the way." Jacob rose from his chair and leaned toward his wife. He placed a loving kiss on her lips. No words came from him, but Rebekah did not miss his happiness at hearing the news. "I know it is only 2 years since Hannah was born, but she and Samuel will like having a new little brooder or shveshta," said Rebekah. Jacob agreed, and he added that their children would not be the only happy ones. "I want to wait a few weeks before I tell our parents." "Do you agree?" asked Rebekah. "If that is the way you want it, then we will wait." Jacob smiled at his wife and thanked his God for yet more blessings. Before they turned in that night, Jacob stood by the window and looked out onto his new barn. The soft lowing of the cows sounded like music to his ears. He breathed another prayer of praise and got into bed next to his wife. When morning came, Samuel was in the kitchen with Jacob when Rebekah came in to start breakfast. "We are going to milk the cows," said Samuel. Rebekah smiled and told him she would have a hot breakfast waiting for them when they finished the morning chores. Samuel grabbed his small pail. Rebekah listened as she heard her son ask Jacob if he could start using a big pail like Jacob's, though she did not hear Jacob's answer. She did not doubt he would give Samuel the chance to try it out. She started to fry the bacon and then cracked several eggs for the large skillet when Hannah's cry reached her from the bedroom. Rebekah pulled the skillet from the fire and went to get the child up and ready for breakfast. Back in the kitchen, Hannah stood waiting for the early morning ritual. Rebekah handed her spoons, which she placed irregularly at each place. She stood on tiptoe to reach and managed as well as a 2-year-old could be expected to do. "You did a good job setting the table," said Rebekah. She placed Hannah into her high chair, and the thought that she should start training her into a regular chair crossed her mind. Then she reminded herself there was plenty of time before the next baby arrived to do that. She heard Jacob's and Samuel's voices and opened the door for them. Once the milk was placed in the icebox, they sat down to eat breakfast. "I will have the garden tilled tomorrow. There is only one small section yet to do," said Jacob. They discussed the seeds to be planted, and Rebekah then mentioned who she wanted to visit this Sunday. There were no church services this week, and the Bylers were anxious to visit their neighbors to thank them again for the hard work on the barn. Hannah picked up on the excitement her brother exuded, and it was difficult for Rebekah to pack in freshly baked cookies and breads to give out to each family. They planned to go to her grandparents' home in back of theirs first. "I will ask them if they want to join us today," said Rebekah. "They may want to get out into the fresh air." She walked down the short path to their home and knocked on the door. Her grandmother, Sarah, answered the door and invited her in. "I believe we will stay home," said Sarah. "Your Dottie is feeling his arthritis today with the damp spring air." Rebekah went inside and spoke to John Stoltzfus. He set his Bible aside and smiled at her. John was a retired bishop from a neighboring Amish community, and some of the local members often visited him for advice if her own father was not available on certain days for them. "I will bring Hannah and Samuel by later this afternoon," said Rebecca. "Jacob wants to visit you as well." Sarah and John told her they looked forward to seeing all of them before evening. When Rebecca joined her family again, they rode off to see her parents first. Clara looked at her daughter in a knowing way, but Rebecca chose to ignore the fact that her mother was aware she was with child again. Claire remained patient, knowing she would be told when Rebecca was ready to give her the news. "We are going to see your Dottis in a little while," said Daniel. "Sundays are a gut time to sit down and get caught up on news." The bishop was very close to his elderly parents, and he, too, often went to his father for counsel. "Your mom has something gut to take to them for their supper tonight." When the Bylers left, they started for Jacob's parents' home. They passed the home of Marian Lapp and her 2 children. Rebecca waved at 16-year-old Katie, who walked from their barn. She did not see Marian or 21-year-old Matthew Lapp. "I must see Marian on our way home," said Jacob. "With her work in town at the bed and breakfast, I'm sure Matthew could use some help around the farm." The Lapp farm was small, but there was a barn with a few animals in it. Rebecca noticed a large garden tilled and ready to be planted. She had not seen Matthew around lately. He usually could be seen in the tilled field or the barn area when doing chores. Katie worked in Rebecca's sewing shop. She must remember to ask her about Matthew. Rumors flew off and on that he was restless and was not adhering to the Amish ways as Marian hoped for him. Rebecca realized that Jacob kept close watch on the widow, who struggled to make ends meet for her family since her husband passed away. Nancy had not mentioned her aunt or her family lately to Rebecca. She and Jacob continued to pray for them and then left everything in the hands of their gut. Jacob and Rebecca knew the Lapps were protected. Chapter 2. Matthew Lapp. On Monday morning, Jacob filled 2 large vats outside to heat water for laundry day. He cautioned Samuel to stand back from the fire that roared under the iron tubs. Then he carried the laundry out for Rebecca. She then poured soap powder into 1 tub and swished the water until the soap dissolved. She put dresses and shirts into the water first. Rebecca took the long stick and used it to sink the clothing beneath the water. Swirling the rod around, she washed the dresses and shirts, then transferred them to the second vat where she swirled them to rinse. Jacob came from the barn and took the stick from her and continued rinsing. "You have enough to do, Jacob," she said. "I will do this. Hannah is secure in the area away from the hot tubs and fire." She smiled and nodded toward the grassy area Jacob partitioned off with chicken wire for their daughter to play in. "I will have Samuel entertain her if she gets restless." Jacob told her he did have to take care of weeds sprouting in the cornfield. "Send Samuel if you need me for anything." She promised she would do that. While Rebecca hung clothes onto the clothesline, she heard Samuel singing a song to his sister. Glancing their way, she saw that Hannah was asleep on the grass. She went inside and returned with a soft quilt and laid her child on it. She heard her grandmother call from her house. "Ask your gross mommy if she needs help," said Rebecca to her son. Samuel was happy to have the diversion. He came back right away. "Gross. Mommy wants me to come to her house and help her snap green beans," he said. Rebecca smiled and waved thanks to Sarah for occupying Samuel for her. "Be sure and help her and Dottie all you can," she said. Samuel called back but was already at the bottom step of Sarah's and John's house. He stopped and walked up the steps into the house. Rebecca returned to the first tub and added wood to reheat the water. She poked work clothing beneath the sudsy water and lost in her thoughts. She failed to hear the buggy arrive in the lane. When she heard the male voice, she jerked her head toward Matthew Lapp. She hardly recognized him. His hair was disheveled, and she noted his light blue cotton shirt was not tucked in all the way around. He tossed his straw hat onto his head and walked toward her. She greeted him and wondered why he was here in the middle of the day rather than working on his mother's farm. "Do you need a tool or something, Matthew?" she asked. "I want to speak with Jacob," he said. His eyes looked toward the new barn and then moved to the cornfield where Jacob worked. "I hope he will not mind if I interrupt him for a few minutes." Rebecca assured him Jacob would not mind and told him to go on out to the field. She watched the young man as he started across the pasture to the field. He looked several times at the new barn, and for the first time, Rebecca recalled she had not seen Matthew help with the barn raising. She dismissed the thought, since he was probably busy on the family farm. She knew Marion worked most weekends and several days through the week for the English family that owned the bed and breakfast in town. She watched her husband climb down from the disc, pulled by the horses, and meet Matthew. They stood and talked for a few minutes. Matthew turned away and walked back toward his buggy. Jacob watched until he got into it. Rebecca wondered what the exchange had been about since Matthew did not return with tools. She was unaware that Jacob promised Matthew the conversation would remain between the two of them. Rebecca went inside the house to begin preparations for the noon meal. She watched Hannah from the kitchen window as the child slept. When Jacob came inside, he brought his daughter with him and helped her wash up for the meal. Rebecca told him where Samuel was when he asked. "What did Matthew want?" she asked. "He spoke of a private matter between us. Someday, when the time is right, I will tell you everything." He smiled at Rebecca, and she accepted his answer. Having been brought up in the home of a bishop, she was accustomed to confidences meant to be kept. Jacob's demeanor grew serious. "We must pray hard for our neighbors, especially the Lapp family." It was not until Rebecca went into town to pick up minor supplies that she overheard rumors about Matthew Lapp. Most surprising of all was the familiar voice of Richard Blanton, who took up for Matthew in front of the gossipers. "Some people must find their own way," he said. "Give Matthew a chance. I feel he could use the same support our community gave me." Rebecca turned her head toward Richard. She suddenly realized she stared at him when his eyes met hers. There was no longer the look of desire in them. She looked away quickly and concentrated on the sacks of sugar and flour. She wished to fill her heart with trust in the man, but she did not know yet if he was trustworthy or not. She decided it better not to concentrate on the man who joined the Amish community a few months previous. Nancy Schrock entered the store. She spoke to the clerk behind the long wooden counter. They negotiated a sale of baskets that Isaac created in their basket shop. Nancy turned to leave and noticed Rebecca in the next aisle. She came toward her, and the friends greeted one another. "I am in a hurry," said Nancy. "Isaac did not have time to talk with Mr. Anderson about more baskets. They will sell faster now that the weather has turned warmer. More tourists will be coming through town." "His baskets are beautiful," said Rebecca. "I can see how well they sell. I plan to stop at your shop before leaving town. My large vegetable basket is wearing out in places. I think a new one is in order." Nancy laughed. "Bring it in and let Isaac take a look. It may just need some repair work." Rebecca agreed to do that and wished she had brought it along with her. She was lost in her thoughts when Nancy nudged her. "Are you listening?" she asked. Rebecca apologized. "Walk outside with me when you finish in here." "I want to speak with you," said Nancy. The clerk assisted Rebecca with the sugar and flour bags and placed them in her buggy. Then Rebecca joined Nancy. "I do not wish to gossip," her friend said, but I feel obligated to tell you because prayers are needed." She continued to tell Rebecca about Matthew Lapp. He is planning to leave our community any day now. Marion is worried sick about it all. It is hard without a husband to deal with a son like Matthew. Though Rebecca did not speak her thoughts, she recalled Katie was not as cheerful as when she first started working for her at the sewing shop. She wished she had asked her if anything was needed. Nancy suggested they bow their heads and whisper a prayer for their neighbors. Rebecca then told Nancy she must get home. Claire worked with Katie Lapp in the shop. Hannah and Samuel were there with her. "I am sure my mom will be ready for relief." "Donka for telling me the concern." "We will pray for the Lapp family," said Rebecca. On her way home, she recalled Jacob's suggestion to pray for the family. He must have known Matthew was ready to give up his place in the Amish community for the outside world. She passed the local bed and breakfast and saw Marion sweeping the front porch of the establishment. She paused and waved to Rebecca when she passed by. Rebecca smiled in return. She marveled how the woman appeared cheerful with the worries she must endure. She wondered also if perhaps Matthew was ready to experience a late rumspringa that most teens took advantage of at a younger age than 21. Jacob noticed his wife coming up the lane and left his work to help unload the bags. "I will go inside and heat the stew and put some biscuits into the oven for you. Jacob, I'm sure you are ready for a gut meal by now." Jacob grinned at her. "I am hungry, but I hope you take time to join me before you return to your shop." Rebecca's heart leapt to her throat. She knew her greatest desire when it came to her husband was to spend every minute she could with him. "I will eat with you. Then I will put some hot food into the basket and take it to the shop with me for Katie and my ma'am." "I hope you put some cookies into that basket for Hannah and Samuel," he said. They both laughed, and she agreed with him. She told Jacob about meeting Nancy in town and the rumors regarding Matthew Lapp. "Do you think he is simply planning to take a late rumspringa?" she asked. Jacob shook his head. "He did that before his dad passed away. He is a restless young man. Perhaps if he goes back into the world, he will find out on his own how gut his life is right here. It will not be easy for him if he chooses to leave." Rebecca recalled the few stories Eli had told her just after they married. Neither she nor Eli spent more than a week away from their Amish community during their running around time out in the world. Once Eli told her he would tell her more of how he met Richard Blanton at a later day. When he was killed in the freak accident out on the highway, there was no longer going to be a one day. Jacob reached over and lifted her chin. "What are your thoughts, my Freya?" "I was thinking of how Eli once told me he would tell me more of how he met Richard out in the world. I believe he mentioned Richard's hard upbringing and believe that is why Richard left his Amish community at an early age." "I heard that story from Eli, too," said Jacob. "I believe Richard's choice of conversations and words he used was enough to drive Eli back to our Amish way of life." Jacob paused. "I believe Richard is feeling more comfortable each day being in this community. At least he did not decide to remain an Englisher." Both wondered how long the man would keep the job at the English newspaper office, but did not voice their thoughts. Chapter 3. Seeing the Heart. Katie Lapp. Early that morning, 16-year-old Katie awoke with a sinking feeling. Late into the night, she listened as her mother begged Matthew to rethink his intentions. She and her brother had once experienced a close relationship. The day their father passed away was the day Matthew changed. He blamed their father for abandoning the family. That day he ran outside and across the large pasture to the fence line in the distance and yelled at their gut. Weeks passed, and Matthew grew colder each day toward his mother and sister until he barely spoke to either of them unless forced to answer a necessary question. "What will happen to my brooder?" asked Katie. She looked into sad and weary eyes. Marian shook her head in frustration. "Will he be happy again?" asked Katie. "We must pray daily for him. One day I believe he will see that the death of your dad was not in his control. His illness took over his body. We miss him, too, but his passing has caused your brooder to become a harsh young man. There is no reasoning with him." Katie's mother asked their bishop and 2 elders to meet with Matthew for counseling. They did so, and each time Matthew appeared to be accepting their guidance. Matthew was 17 at the time and had just returned from his rumspring, 2 weeks before his father's death. 2 months later, an English teenager came to their door and asked for Matthew. Marian watched her son lose weight and walk in a daze after that visit. He often left the house in the middle of the night. She learned the reason for the Englisher's visit. One of the elders, a close friend to her husband, explained how some of the Amish teenagers on Rumspringa were introduced to drugs that impaired everything about them. Marian's heart dropped, and she wept through the night. The bishop realized Matthew's problem was deeper than the Amish community had resources to help him with. Unknown to most in the community, Matthew was taken to a rehabilitation center 50 miles from the community to get help to overcome his drug problem. Marian took the cash reserve her husband built up for them to pay for the treatment. During this time, she decided to move the family closer to the Yoder family. Her sister's family welcomed them with open arms 2 days after Matthew returned home from his 3-month treatment. He appeared physically healthy again, but Marian worried about his lack of ability to accept the will of God in taking his father away. Her niece, Nancy, made sure she spent time with Matthew and introduced him to the unmarried youth who enjoyed socializing and weekly sings and games. Sometimes he joined them, but not every time. "I believe this move is a gut thing for your Matthew," said Anna Yoder to her sister. "He will become acquainted with our young people and settle down soon. I asked Nancy to introduce him and Katie to the young ones." Marian was encouraged by the support their new community gave them. She was aware of the rumors that circulated about her son and his tendency to destroy himself and everything around him as well. She prayed harder. With their financial resources at rock bottom, she felt blessed to procure the job at the bed and breakfast and enjoyed the work. Rebecca Byler generously offered Katie a job. Between the 2 incomes, money once again flowed. Matthew tilled the land on the small farm and seemed to handle the money responsibly when he procured needed goods from town. The night Katie heard the back door creak was the night she knew her brother sneaked out of the house again. She went to the window and watched him in the moonlight as he made his way across the pasture. Once he walked through the narrow wooded area, he was out of sight. Katie looked toward the starry sky and prayed fervently for her brother for 30 minutes. She praised her God for his goodness to her family. Once back in bed, she found it hard to sleep. The sun rays that filtered through the gauze curtains awoke her from a fitful sleep early in the morning. "Are you feeling all right, Doctor?" asked Marian. "You appear very tired." Katie's smile did not reach her eyes. When she reassured her mother she was fine. "I could not sleep well for some reason, but I am not ill." Katie turned her head in shame that she could not tell her mother what she had seen. "Your brooder is coming in from milking. He will be hungry for his breakfast," said Marian. "That is gut," said Katie. "I have to be at the sewing shop right at 8 this morning." She knew her mother did not work today. Otherwise, she would have offered to help more with chores needed. "Are you going to weed the garden today?" "I am ready to be outside and the weeds call me," said Marian. Her laugh heartened Katie. "I will clean the house tomorrow," she said. Rebecca will take care of the shop all day and I have the day off. Rebecca is a kind woman. You are blessed she allows everyone to have time to take care of chores at home, said Marian. When Matthew came inside, he bumped one pail of milk on the edge of the counter, causing some of the milk to spill onto the floor. Marian reached for a pail. She took it outside and filled it with water. When she returned, she looked at her son. He had not apologized for the spill, and he did not offer to help clean it up. It occurred to Marian he did not look well. She wondered if both her children were coming down with an illness. Opening her cabinet, she said, "You both need a dose of cod liver oil. Neither of you look well this morning." She did not wait for protests. She poured a tablespoon of the liquid and told Matthew to open his mouth. He complied, and she did the same with Katie. "I am fine, ma'am. Really," said Katie. "I did not sleep well because I thought I heard a noise in the night." Marian ignored her excuses, but Matthew looked at his sister. He did not speak, but his eyes told Katie to keep quiet about his movements in the night. Inwardly, she shuddered from the foreign look on his face. For the first time in her life, she was afraid of her brother. Katie hurried to the sewing shop and inserted the key. When she opened the door, she smelled the freshness of the bolts of material. Clara had swept before she left the day before, and the counter shined. She hung her light wrap on the hook at the back of the store and went out to the front again. She hoped enough customers arrived throughout the day to aid in keeping her mind from the troubles in her home. She opened the Bible that Rebecca left under the counter and turned to the Psalms. A slip of paper fell out. She read the quote in Rebecca's handwriting. "Stamp God's word on your heart. It will keep you from losing your way." If only Matthew would return to their God's word, he would not lose his way, she thought. She bowed her head and prayed fervently for her brother. She praised God for his goodness and smiled when the bell rang over the door. "Good morning, Katie," said Rebecca. "I will help you today. Martha Hirschberger will come in today to choose material for her wedding." "She will find the right fabric here," said Katie. Together they walked to the large bolts. "I like the soft blue cotton. The lighter shade would be perfect for her." Rebecca agreed with Katie's choice. "I like that tone as well, but it will be Martha's choice, of course." The bell rang, and the women turned as 3 customers arrived. 2 of them headed for the array of needles and threads. The other one was an Englisher. She smiled at the women when Katie asked if she could help her. She drew back at the clear emerald green eyes that landed on her face. The woman's sun-streaked hair was fastened into a twisted bun on back of her head. Her skin was flawless. "I am looking for woolen material," she said. "I know it is out of season right now, but I hope you have some on hand. My sister lives in the east and Maine brings colder weather than I can take." Her soft laugh caused both women to smile with her. "She would love your quality of fabric." "Does she sew her clothes?" asked Katie. That was something she always wondered about Englishers, whether they sewed or not. The emerald eyes shined in the filtering sunlight through the window. "Our mother taught us both to sew, but neither of us took the skill to heart. She will have someone make a warm shawl for her, I am sure." The woman stood back and looked at her own physique. "She is close to my size. How much material should I buy for a comfortable shawl?" "That is, if you have wool on hand, of course," she added. Rebecca told her there was woolen fabric toward the back of the shop. The woman followed her. She fingered the tawny brown and thought of her sister's amber eyes. "I believe with her brown eyes. Perhaps you can suggest a good color for her. Her skin is similar to mine. I like a deep blue tone," said Katie. "This dark blue may work, or the deeper brown. It has minute specks in it to give it a variation in the material." When Rebecca purchased the bolt of material, she wondered if her community would think it too bold to wear something with any variation at all. In the material. Several women looked at it with longing in their eyes, but did not purchase cuttings from it. She realized she must wait until a tourist arrived before getting rid of the material. One had just arrived. "I like the speckled tones in the deep brown material. The wool is very soft to the touch." "I think it is perfect," said the woman. They discussed the measurements needed, and Rebecca took the bolt to the cutting table, while Katie checked out the two Amish women. They chatted briefly, and as they left the shop, they met a young man who entered. "Matthew, what are you doing here?" asked Katie. His eyes darted around the shop. When he saw that his sister was not alone, he turned and left without a word. Rebecca pretended not to notice the exchange between the two siblings. She wrapped the woolen material inside a brown wrapper and placed it into a sack. Katie's fingers trembled as she attempted to control herself. Rebecca moved in smoothly and checked the woman out. "I am in love with your community. Anything I have ever purchased from the Amish is of highest quality," said the woman. "Danke, thank you," said Rebecca. When the woman left, she turned to Katie. "We must find time to talk together. We will close the shop during lunchtime, and you will come with me to have dinner at my house." She left no option for a protest, and Katie did not have the desire to provide one. Chapter 4. Fearful Pangs. Jacob greeted Katie when he came inside. She set the table and assisted Rebecca with the hot dishes of mashed potatoes, green beans, and roast beef that had baked in the oven while they worked in the shop. Hannah and Samuel chattered away. "I picked them up from their daughter's house," said Jacob. According to their gross mommy, both of them helped considerably. He winked at Rebecca, but in a way Samuel missed the gesture. Rebecca looked at her son. This coming September she could no longer keep him at home. He was eager to join neighbors his age at school. It was harder to find things to occupy him around home. "My mom is coming to the shop this afternoon," said Rebecca. "Katie and I will take a longer break and go back at 2 o'clock so she can go home if she wants to." She looked at her children. "You and Hannah will come back with us for the afternoon." "I have a large pan of green peas that needs snapping, Samuel. That will be your job while Hannah takes her nap." His eyes lit up. Any task appealed to him as long as he did not have time on his hands to get into trouble. Jacob took everyone's empty plates to the counter and kissed his wife lightly on her cheek. He told Katie to come back any time for dinner, and he left for the barn. Rebecca told Samuel to take Hannah to the sitting room. She heard him talk to his sister and suggested building blocks that Jacob made for them. Then she turned to Katie. "What is it, Katie?" "I know something is bothering you." Katie fought tears. "We will pray first," Rebecca said, "and then you must say things you are keeping inside you. I promise this conversation will be between us only. I will not even tell Jacob your words to me." Katie nodded her head. They bowed their heads at the table, and Rebecca prayed aloud for a peaceful heart for Katie and her family. They prayed prayers of praise for their God's goodness and His power over all circumstances. When they were finished, Katie looked at Rebecca. "My mom and I are very worried about Matthew." She found herself telling Rebecca the entire story of Matthew's drug problems in their former community and how he got into the devastating consequences of the addiction. "No one must know this," she said. Rebecca repeated her promise to her. "Last night I saw him leave our house in the middle of the night. He knows I saw him. He gave me a menacing look this morning as if a warning not to tell Mom. Is that why he came to the shop? Did he want to speak to you alone? I'm sure that is why he came in. When he saw that I was not alone, that is why he left. I am sure of it. Her eyes locked with Rebecca. I am afraid of him and of what he may do. He once was in trouble for vandalizing other Amish property. He was filled with anger. She told Rebecca how her brother sank into the depths of despair after their father's death. Rebecca reached for her hands, which were cold. She felt the tremors. I believe he is beyond the anger over our dad's death. Now he is just filled with a harshness so unlike him. I think he prefers to live outside the Amish community, but if he goes that way, he will lose his life to drugs. Katie, listen to me. I understand how worried you and your mom must be, but try to relax when you pray. God will give you peace and allow you to let Him take over every issue that ever arises in our lives. He had Matthew in His sights. You must focus on God and His power, not Matthew and his problems. God will take care of that part. They sat in silence a few minutes. Rebecca noticed lessened tremors in Katie's hands. She let go of them and put the coffee pot onto the stove. Once hot again, she poured 2 cups for them and sat back down. Samuel came into the kitchen. Hannah is almost falling asleep. I do not think she wants to play. You have done a gut job of keeping her happy, said Rebecca. I must make sure she stays awake until we get back to the shop. Katie poured a glass of milk for Samuel and placed the plate of cookies on the table. She then poured half a glass for Hannah, who smiled when Rebecca set her into the high chair. For the first time, Katie saw that Rebecca's stomach bulged a little. She was sure she was with child again. She promised herself that one day she would find someone as good as Jacob, and together they would create their own family together. We had better get back to work, said Rebecca. It is a nice day, and we will walk across the pasture to the shop. Samuel and Hannah danced around the kitchen, and Katie laughed at their antics. They sang songs as they crossed the uneven meadow. Several times, Katie picked Hannah up from the soft earth. She finally took her into her arms and carried her the rest of the way. You will be a gut, ma'am, someday, Katie, said Rebecca. She felt contentment at how much Katie relaxed and watched her lift her eyes to the cobalt sky above them. The afternoon passed quickly. More customers arrived and more material needed cutting. When Martha Hirschberger came in, her eyes lit like night stars. Rebecca was caught up in her excitement as they looked at the cotton fabric. She exchanged glances with Katie when Martha chose the light blue. Katie, will you please cut the material for Martha? We will choose the thread. Katie was expert when it came to cutting fabric for customers. Rebecca was pleased at how fast she learned the operations of a sewing shop. During down times, she taught her more sewing skills, and Katie improved each time. When the shop emptied again, Katie picked up a piece she was worked on. Her goal was to make a quilt for her mother. Rebecca went to look in on her children. Samuel was on the floor and Hannah slept in her bed. I am making a farm, said Samuel. His blocks lined up with small lanes from a stack meant to be a house to another stack that was his barn. This road goes to Dade in the field. Rebecca stooped down to hug her son. She pulled back quickly at the pain that shot through her. She grabbed her stomach and leaned over to relieve the stabbing that continued. Samuel looked at her. Ma'am, what is the matter? Are you sick? He asked. Katie heard the small boy's concern and hurried to the back of the shop. She took one look at Rebecca and said to Samuel, Hurry to your gross, Mommy's house, and tell her to come right away. Samuel raced across the pasture to the Stoltzfus home and into the kitchen. The bishop and Clara sat at the table drinking cups of coffee. Clara looked up startled at the wide eyes of her grandson. "What is it, Samuel? Is something wrong?" He nodded his head up and down. "Come to the shop. Mom is not feeling well." In short time, Clara was at the shop. Daniel hurried to the barn and hitched the buggy to the horse and raced it across the pasture, ignoring the roadway. When he entered, he saw his daughter's pale face, and she clutched her stomach, as in pain. "We must get her home and call the doctor," said Clara. "Katie, you stay here until closing." Her eyes glanced at her granddaughter still sleeping in her bed. "I must take the Kinner with me." "No, Clara, I will take care of them." "They can help me," said Katie. She smiled at Samuel. His eyes held fear. "Do not worry about your Mayum, Samuel. She will be fine. God has her in his hands. I need you here. You can take her place until she feels better." She saw the child relax, and he nodded his head with approval. Bishop Daniel Stoltzfus prayed aloud as he carried his daughter to the buggy. Clara went ahead of him and layered 2 blankets in back, where he positioned her as comfortably as he could. He continued prayers until they arrived at the Byler home. He drove his horse on the road but realized it must be adding to his daughter's discomfort. When they pulled to the house, Jacob came from the barn. One of his cows was near her time to give birth to a calf, and he was satisfied at her progress. When he saw Daniel carry Rebecca from the buggy, he raced to them all. Clara explained what had happened. "We know she is with child, Jacob." She said, "She may be miscarrying, but I cannot be sure. Katie used the phone in back of the shop and has called the English doctor." Clara knew the doctor well. He delivered Samuel and Hannah and told them each time to call him if needed. He made house calls, and that included to Amish homes if needed. Daniel placed Rebecca in her bed after Clara pulled the covers back for her. Her eyes fluttered, and Jacob gasped at her ashen face. He knelt beside the bed and took her hands into his. He heard the bishop's words of prayer, but had no idea what he prayed. Rebecca turned her head toward her husband. Her voice was a whisper when she spoke. "Do not worry, Jacob. This Bobley will arrive safe and sound. He or she will be as healthy as the 2 we have." She attempted a smile and tried not to clutch her stomach again. The bishop left the room to wait for the doctor. Clara prepared cool cloths to press against her daughter's face. The car sped up the lane, and when the doctor got out, Daniel was surprised to see the young face of the newly arrived doctor in town. He shared an office with Dr. Anderson. They knew so well. "I am Dr. Walton," he said by way of introduction. "Dr. Anderson had an emergency at the hospital and asked if I would come out." "Where is the patient?" Daniel showed him to Rebecca's bedroom and then returned to the kitchen. He was joined by Clara. Jacob stood back while the doctor examined his wife. Dr. Walton turned to him and suggested he wait with his in-laws. His smile was reassuring, but Jacob knew things were not going well with Rebecca. Reluctantly, he turned away and joined Clara and Daniel. Daniel continued his prayers, but stopped when he saw Jacob. "Do not worry, Jacob. This doctor appears to be as good as Dr. Anderson, even though he seems quite young. I'm sure Rebecca will be fine." Jacob nodded and accepted the hot coffee Claire offered him. "Sit down here and wait as we are doing," she said. "Rebecca is strong, and she will be fine." It is good that the doctor made time to come to her. It would have been hard on her if we had to go all the way into town. Each retreated to silence, but could hear muffled cries from behind the closed door of the bedroom. After a few minutes, even though sounds were silenced. The doctor opened the door at last, and all three stood in expectation. "She will be fine. I believe the baby is saved as well, but it is early to tell. She must remain in bed for the next 2 to 3 weeks. I will come back tomorrow and check on her. In the meantime, she is lightly sedated so she can rest. She has something for pain relief as well. It will not harm the baby inside her." "Danke, doctor," said Clara. "Would you like to have a cup of cafe before you leave?" "I must be on my way. There is a lady on the other side of town who needs me this afternoon." He eyed the 3 loaves of bread on the counter and quickly turned his head in embarrassment, hoping no one noticed his mouth watering. He knew Dr. Anderson did not charge for house calls he made on rare occasions, and so he expected no pay today. "We will pay you for your services," said Daniel. "How much do we owe you?" Clara had noticed the longing for the fresh bread in the young man's eyes. Dr. Walton assured them they owed him nothing. Clara wrapped a loaf tightly and handed it to him. "Take this instead, then," she said. His smile brightened the room when he thanked her. Jacob returned to his wife's bedside. She slept and no longer clutched her stomach. Color began to return to her face. He rested his head against her arm and thanked his God for his protection and blessings. Chapter 5. Intruder. The days that followed Rebecca's near miscarriage changed in routine. The Amish women took turns cooking meals and doing other chores for her as needed. More than once Jacob saw the weedless garden, though he never saw anyone actually weeding it. Rebecca's produce thrived, and he anticipated green peppers and tomatoes soon. At one of the busiest seasons for every family, the members still found time to help with the children's care and the chores needed around their home. He and Rebecca prayed together at her bedside and praised God for their blessings. Katie and Claire took care of the shop and closed daily at noon for their meal. Katie often cooked meals ahead in the Byler home during that time, or she joined Daniel and Clara for her noon meal. When she protested and said she would carry her lunch in, they had no part of it. "You have helped us all greatly, Katie," said Clara. "You are part of our family." The 3rd day of Rebecca's confinement was a Sunday. There were no church services that week, and Katie offered to take the children for the day. "My mom does not work today, and we would enjoy having them with us," she said. Clara knew about Matthew's coldness, but no one had seen him around lately. She felt Marian would delight in having small ones around her house, and Katie was drawn to both of them. Rebecca and Jacob agreed as long as Marian approved of the invasion, as they put it. Katie had laughed and told them that her mother heard enough about Hannah and Samuel that she was sure she would not object. Katie looked forward to having them in their home, and she was right about Marian's acceptance. Matthew had not been home for over a week. They prayed daily for him, but Katie repeated Rebecca's advice to her mother. Both felt inner peace and finally left the care of Matthew up to their gut. The voices of the children filled the air in the once despondent household, and for the first time in a long while, Marian laughed wholeheartedly, especially at Samuel's antics. He obviously loved his sister. With heavy heart, she thought of the relationship once held between her own son and daughter. She quickly brushed negative thoughts away and knew they would reconnect soon as in days past. Rebecca talked with Jacob, who sat on her side of the bed. "I feel better each day," she said. "I would like to get out of this bed soon." "Do not rush things, Rebecca. I know you are feeling better, but you still have 10 days to go before thinking about getting out of bed." Her face fell. "Perhaps when you are in town this week, you will stop and see Dr. Walton. Ask him if I can at least move to the sitting room and sit in a chair for a change. Jacob squeezed her hand and smiled. "I will ask him, but he was firm about 2 weeks in bed. He will be here Wednesday to check you over again. Can you wait a few days and ask him yourself?" Rebecca sighed. "If you feel that is best, I will wait and ask him myself. I am grateful for everyone taking turns doing my chores, Jacob. But it is a busy time of the year for all of them. They have their own work to do." "Are you forgetting how often you have helped someone out even though you had plenty to do here?" he asked. "It is the same with them. Our community is united and no one would feel good about it if they did not help you." He did not tell her he came in earlier than usual from the fields, to allow whoever came a particular day to go back to their own duties. Nancy Schrock spent more time than any of them. She often read to Rebecca, and more than once he heard them laughing and talking about their childhood years together. He smiled at the memories of how they and Eli, along with Jacob, spent hours of fun together. Of course, times of getting into trouble together were never far from his mind either. It was Tuesday, and Martha Hirschberger arrived to cook the noon meal. She brought her wedding dress for Rebecca to see. "I want to get your approval of my stitches, Rebecca. It is not finished, but in a few days I will be ready to try it on for the last time before my wedding day." Rebecca fingered the garment eagerly. Martha's stitches were near perfect. The glow in her eyes brought back memories of her own wedding day, first to Eli and then to Jacob. "This is beautiful. Martha, you will remember this wedding day forever, and I know you and Thomas will be very happy." Martha laughed. "Danka, I know it is several months before November arrives, but I wanted to finish it as soon as possible." "I understand that. I remember how excited I was. I sewed my dress 3 months before our wedding day. Once Eli and I were married, I told him about it. He laughed at me and said if he had known I was that ready, he would have gotten a dispensation from my dade to marry us sooner." "Eli had a gut sense of humor," said Martha. She jumped up. "I am forgetting why I am here. I put the chicken into the oven to bake, but I have other food to prepare. Jacob will be in soon for his dinner, and it will not be ready." Rebecca chuckled as she hurried from the bedroom. Rebecca listened to the sounds of pans clattering, and then heard her mother's voice. Samuel and Hannah came into the bedroom and gave her a hug. "Gross, Mommy wants to take us into town with her this afternoon," said Samuel. "We have to wait for Hannah to take her nap first. Remember, do not ask for candy, Samuel." He nodded affirmation. They both knew Clara would buy them a stick of candy anyway, but neither voiced the fact. Rebecca missed spending active time with her children. Patience was not one of her assets. It did not help matters since she felt well enough. She touched her stomach and felt a slight movement. That was the day she knew she must do everything possible to save the life inside her. Martha finished cleaning up the kitchen. Jacob returned to the field but kept an eye on the house and came in several times to check on Rebecca. Other than his movements, everything was quiet in Rebecca's small world. She read her Bible and picked up a sewing project. She worked on the quilt blocks, one by one, completing the third one. She thought of the baby who would sleep beneath the coverlet. Glancing at the clock, she noted 3 o'clock before she drifted off to sleep. She awakened a few minutes later to sounds at the back door. Smiling to herself, she closed her eyes and waited for Jacob to stand in the doorway to make sure she was fine. She wondered how he was getting his work done. She pretended to sleep with the intentions he would be satisfied with her, well-belling, and get back to work sooner. There was an odor she did not recognize, not far from her bed. Rebecca recognized the smell of used cigarettes that Englishers sometimes smoked. She opened her eyes to stare at the man who was not Jacob. He stood looking at her with a disagreeable demeanor. "What are you doing in here?" she asked. She hoped her voice did not betray her trembling body beneath the light blanket. "Please leave now." The man stood where he was. He placed himself a few feet from the bed. His intentions were to upset her. That was something Rebecca realized when he made no further move. Jacob had left the house 20 minutes earlier, and she knew it would be another 20 or 30 minutes before he returned. Something told her this man knew the pattern as well. "I came to see how you are feeling. I heard you have another little one on the way, and things are not going so well." He sneered. "I hope I am not one to cause the loss of this small one. That would be more tragic than the loss of your barn and animals not so long ago." Rebecca did not answer. She was silently praying for courage and strength. She asked God to remove the disturbing man from her bedroom. He remained where he was. "Am I disturbing you?" he asked. He stopped short when both heard the shouts of Samuel and Hannah from outside. He turned and ran from the room. She heard the front door slam behind him. Clara and the children came into the bedroom. Samuel chattered about the afternoon in town. He told Rebecca about everyone they saw and the shops they went into. "Grossmommy bought us a candy stick. I did not ask for one. She just gave us one." His eyes were luminous with hope his mother would believe him. Clara noted the paleness of her daughter's face. She gathered the children and pulled them from the bed. "Go and wash your hands. Then play in the other room for a while. I will be out soon and you can help me get supper ready for your mom and dad." Once the children were out of the room, Clara reached for her daughter's hand. It was cold and clammy. She felt the tremors that raced through Rebecca's body. "What is it, Doctor?" she asked. "Are you not feeling well?" Rebecca turned her head from her mother. Clara squeezed her hand again. Rebecca's voice trembled, and Clara noted fear in her eyes. She recalled the same look when Richard Blanton stalked her daughter. That was long before he converted to the Amish way of life. Her husband spent many hours counseling him. His turnaround was a blessing, and Richard joined the community. Now he was more comfortable than ever back in the Amish way of life. It was a life he had never experienced the true way as a child growing up in an abusive home. "I will get Jacob for you," said Claire. "Let's pray first." God does not wish turmoil in our lives. Nothing overtakes the power of God. After the prayer, Claire released her daughter's hand that remained cold. Prayer had not restored peace to her. Whatever happened to Rebecca had nothing to do with the difficulty of carrying this child. On her way to the field to get Jacob, Claire recalled who had been in to help Rebecca that day. She knew Martha Hirschberger had nothing to do with upsetting Rebecca. Someone or something happened to disturb her while she was alone in the house. Clara could not think who it could have been. She thought of the burned barn, due to an explosion deliberately set. Could it be the same person who came into the house to ensure Rebecca would not carry her baby to term safely? She and Daniel had discussed who had anything against their daughter and her family. Clara felt her husband knew who the perpetrator was, but because of his role as bishop in their community, he felt obligated to keep things to himself on the matter. Jacob saw his mother-in-law coming across the field. He threw down the hoe and hurried to her. Has something happened to Rebecca? Fear crossed his face. Is she all right? Clara told him of Rebecca's request. Something upset her this afternoon when she was alone. That is all I can say, since she wishes to speak with you first about the matter. We prayed together over it all, but she is badly shaken up. Jacob rushed past Claire. He ignored his son's attempted welcome and words he spoke about his afternoon in town. He closed the bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed. He cradled Rebecca in his strong arms and hugged her tightly. "What is it, my Freya? What has you so upset?" Chapter 6. Weeping. The man stood hidden in the woods. He had taken a chance going inside the house and into the bedroom where Rebecca slept. He saw the fear in her eyes when she realized the two of them were alone in the house together. He watched Jacob check on her and then saw Claire leave with the two children. He knew Martha left earlier and that Rebecca was the only one left. He slipped easily through the back door. He had not meant to let the door slam behind him, but did not worry so much. He decided Rebecca would think someone was coming in to check on her. In a way, that is what he was doing, so that point was justified in his mind. Clara returned sooner than he expected. He narrowly escaped by being seen by her or the children. It was when he saw Claire run to alert Jacob that he once again felt remorse for his actions. What was wrong with him? He had apologized to the bishop for the explosion and offered compensation to the Bylers through the bishop. Bishop Daniel promised to keep the knowledge confidential, stating Jacob and Rebecca had forgiven whoever held anything against them. They had resumed their lives as if everything worked out for the best. That was what infuriated him. His life was not working out for the best. His heart filled with resentment at the peace everyone in the Amish community seemed to feel. No matter what happened, everyone gathered to support their neighbors and life resumed as if nothing amiss had occurred. He wanted to hurt the Bylers to the point where they would feel his frustration and disappointment with life. If he could not enjoy it, then neither should they, he thought. He was most aggravated with himself when he asked why he targeted the Bylers in particular. He shrugged any reasons off easily. The bishop counseled him to let go of his former unhappy life. When he left Bishop Stoltzfus the last time, he knew he would continue to do bad things to good people. He had no control over his impulsive tendencies. When the bishop prayed with him, they were mere words that held no meaning. Once again, he sat on the sticks and low-growing brush and wept. Chapter 7. Queen of My Heart. After Jacob heard Rebecca's story, he hugged her tighter. "Do not worry, Rebecca. I will put a stop to this once and for all." Rebecca noticed steel in the eyes of her husband. She pulled at his arm. "Jacob, do not do anything until you speak with our Dades. Please ask Ma'am to stay here and you go and talk with my dad. Together, I wish that you go to your day together. Please work this out peacefully. I do not think the man meant real harm. I believe he just wanted to upset me for some reason." He had his reasons for sure, Rebecca. But we cannot allow this behavior to continue. I will do as you ask. From now on, you will not be left alone until we can get our lives back to normal. Jacob approached Clara with concern in his face. She listened as he told her Rebecca's wishes. She still did not know what upset her daughter, but she knew to wait a while longer. Then she had an idea. "Jacob, I think we should move Rebecca to our house with the children until she is well enough to be on her feet again." The relief that flooded her son-in-law soothed Clara. "It will not be for long, and you can eat with us and sleep there, too. I will tell the community that I want Rebecca closer so she can be tended more. It will give everyone a chance to go back to their own responsibilities in their own homes." Jacob left that part in her hands, and he headed for the bishop's house. From there, both went to Mark Byler's home. Martha Byler's home. Martha Byler made a fresh pot of coffee and sliced banana bread. She placed the refreshments on the table and left the men to themselves. She knew something serious was going on. She and Mark discussed the negative vibe that seemed to permeate their otherwise peaceful community more than once. Mark voiced his concern to her about Richard Blanton. After talking it over, neither of them saw any visible signs that Richard had ill feelings against anyone. He seemed to accept life in a true Amish community and was progressing well. He arose early every morning and milked the cows for the Stoffers in exchange for the small house they allowed him to live in on their property. He then ate his breakfast and left for work at the newspaper office. No one had seen signs of anything amiss about the man. When the three men sat down, Daniel reached for a fork and cut off a chunk of the fresh bread. He chewed silently while they waited for him to speak. "Jacob, tell your dad everything that happened with Rebecca when the man came into your house." Mark's eyes shot up toward his son. Jacob related the events. "I am very worried about Rebecca's safety," he said. "I think his intention was to cause her to experience a miscarriage by upsetting her like that. I feel he is the one who set the explosion that burned my property." Mark and Jacob looked at Bishop Daniel. They could tell he was wrestling with his conscience. After a few minutes, he decided that in lieu of the recent events, Jacob had a right to know who burned his property and animals. He knew now that it was the same person who had frightened his daughter. No matter how much counseling had gone on, the man did not take it to heart. He voiced his knowledge to them and bowed his head in despair. "I tried everything and was sure he would listen and change his ways. He is filled with doubts and underlying anger. I explained to him that everyone feels slighted at times, but it is what we do with those feelings that matter. He did not listen at all. I believe it is time to involve the Englisher Police Department. My son and your daughter are in grave danger," said Mark. "They can decide what to do with him. If we involve the outside law, it means Jacob will be pressing charges in a court of an English courtroom," said Daniel. "We know it is not our way to hold charges against another." Mark spread his hands in frustration. "Then what is your opinion? Counseling has not helped. Forgiveness in this case has not mattered. Rebecca and Jacob are entitled to a peaceful life. They have done nothing to urge this kind of behavior." Daniel had to agree with his concise conclusion. He looked at Jacob. "What do you suggest we do?" Jacob knew well what he wanted to do, but was horrified at his thoughts. He realized if he came close to carrying out his take on it all, he would be no different than the man who worked against him and his family. "I agree. It is not our way to press charges against a man. Perhaps we can speak with the head detective in town. We can let him know what is going on, but make him understand we merely want them to follow up. We must make him understand we will not press charges." The men sat in silence until Daniel spoke. "Let us pray over the matter. We will decide for sure tomorrow. In the meantime, we must carry on as usual and try to maintain forgiveness in our hearts." After Jacob settled his family at his in-laws' home, he returned to his nightly chores. He told Samuel he would take him early in the morning to milk again. In the meantime, he advised his son to help his daughters with their chores. When Jacob pulled up to his property, he thought he saw a shadow around the side of the barn. The figure entered the barn. The sun began to set, and the red and orange glows from the horizon reflected on the person just as he went inside. Jacob quickly ran to the barn and watched Richard Blanton retrieve a milk pail from the hook. He took the cloth off it and pulled a stool out. He sat at the cow and began to milk it. "How did you know to come and milk my cows?" asked Jacob. Thoughts that his wife had pointed to the wrong man crossed his mind like a flash of light. "The editor at the paper asked me to distribute papers to Amish businesses this week. I left one with Katie at Rebecca's shop, and she told me Rebecca was spending time in bed for a few weeks." He looked at Jacob. "I just thought with everything going on, You could use some help." He pulled out the second stool and handed Jacob a pail. Together, they milked the cows in silence. "Why do you seem to show up around here when there is trouble?" asked Jacob. "I know you still have suspicions about me," said Richard. "I am sincere in my intentions to become a gut Amish man as you are." Jacob took notice of the Amish lingo Richard seemed comfortable using at last. "I want to help my neighbors like any Amish person. Bishop Stoltzfus has spent many hours counseling me and teaching me the way I should be living. He has helped me forget my past to the degree that I can move on in a positive way." "Do you know Matthew Lapp?" asked Jacob. "I do know him. I am keeping my eye on him when I'm not working at the newspaper office. I have seen him in and out of town. I hope he is not bothering you and your family." Later, Jacob wondered why he would speak that way. He chose not to answer directly at the time. Richard Blanton appeared to be involving himself into his chosen lifestyle in the community, but something told Jacob he may know Matthew better than he let on. He dropped the thoughts, and now that his family was safe, life could run smoother. That night, as Jacob lay close to Rebecca in bed, he enveloped her in his arms. "This will not last much longer," he told her. "We will soon have our lives back to normal, with a third Bopley keeping us busy." He told her of the discussion between his father-in-law and himself. "I believe the matter will be taken care of soon. You are a strong woman, Rebecca. Together we will raise our family in the right way. I do not believe you will be harmed in any way." Rebecca breathed deeply. "I believe you are right, Jacob. Once my bed rest is finished, things will proceed as we hoped and prayed for." Jacob reminded her that there was no guarantee Dr. Walton would release her from bed rest. "Take advantage of your release from chores," he teased. "You have a chance to live as a queen." She laughed aloud. "I have no idea how a queen lives. Do you?" "I know she does not work like you do." "I have no idea how she fills her day." He looked at his wife and his eyes sparkled with humor. "You would not be a gut queen. You would have no experience in doing nothing." This night, neither Jacob nor Rebecca dwelt on concerns. They put everything into the hands of their gut. They prayed for the mixed-up man who seemed intent on interfering in their lives. "I love you, Jacob Byler," said Rebecca. He pulled her closer to him. Together, they fell asleep with anticipation of tomorrow that would bring a new day of faith and trust in the God they worshipped. The end. Thank you for listening. Here at PureRead, we aim to serve you, our dear readers and listeners, with good, clean Christian stories. You can be assured that any PureRead book you pick up will not only be hugely enjoyable, but free of any objectionable content. We are deeply thankful to you for choosing our books. Your support means that we can continue to provide stories like the one you have just listened to. To browse our range of clean and wholesome titles, go to pureread.com. Please like and subscribe to our channel. That way you'll be the first to hear when new stories arrive here for your enjoyment. God bless you, and thank you again for listening.